But now let us move into the world of saving. Would you save? Are you a saver? Would you be a saver? Are you fed up with the way savers are treated? Do you even bother saving? 03459811111. Now, the Bank of England decided last week to keep interest rates unchanged at 0.5%, where we've been since March 2009. So anyone with even a small amount of savings will have seen hardly any growth for over 4 years now. My guest this morning is Simon Rose from the campaign group SaveOurSavers. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning.
Now, nothing has shifted since 2009, and the Bank of England have decided to keep interest rates unchanged. Can you unravel that for us and tell us what it really means?
You're right. Yes, you're right. Well, they put their interest rate, which leads the markets, down to 0.5% in March 2009. You say nothing's changed. In fact, savings rates have been steadily coming down since then, and recently their latest scheme, Funding for Lending, which provides banks and building societies with money and the hope they're going to lend it on, has meant that the banks and building societies feel they don't need savers' money. So savers' rates have come down even more. So you'll have many miserable savers who are listeners who just wonder what on earth is going on.
Well, what on earth is going on? I mean, we are a nation of savers, aren't we? We put it in boxes and teapots and we put it under our bed and behind pictures. What are savers now doing? I mean, we're told that we've got to be, in times of austerity, we have to, really watch our pennies, and then the pounds will look after themselves. What can the saver do?
Well, that is absolutely right. In times of austerity, people do want to save. This is the very odd thing about the Bank of England's actions. They somehow thought that by cutting interest rates, people would immediately go out and spend more. Their only answer to everything is to get us into the high street and spend money, however unwise. But most people don't react to a crisis like this in that way at all. They think, hang on a second, if the economy isn't booming, I'd better try and make sure that I can look after myself in times of hardship. And so people are saving more. But having said that, it's only, according to the Telegraph recently, the average family's only got enough savings to cover them for 18 days if they lose their income, which is a pretty scary statistic.
Well, yes, and also the other one. I mean, even my eyes open on this one. Back in 2006, 35% of us could balance our books, but now it's 52% of us are finding it hard to survive.
Well, it is getting incredibly difficult. For many people, I mean, savers, pensioners, people who've retired often depend upon their savings for income. And obviously, the lower interest rates are, the lower that income is, and it's getting incredibly difficult. But it's for everybody. We represent, at Save Our Savers, we represent savers and pensioners, but the things we've been banging on about are true for everybody, because it isn't just that savings rates have gone down, it's that the Bank of England, whose primary role, after all, is to safeguard the value of our money. Well, the problem is that they're supposed to keep inflation at 2%, and for the last 5 years, for most of the time, it's been above that. It's currently getting on to 3%. They say it'll go above that. Well, that means that your money is being eroded by as much as 3% every single year. And since the crisis began, of course, wages have barely budged. So even if you're in work, then you will find that the value of your money is going down all the time. And that's one reason why everybody is finding times so hard, except maybe the top 1% or so, working in the city or who really paid an enormous amount of money. Then perhaps it won't matter. But for the majority of us, this is really, really stretching our budgets.
Now, your campaign group, Save Our Savers, what are you calling for?
Well, we would like to see the sort of emphasis on savings that we really ought to have. I mean, we hear from a lot of people, savers should be fortunate they've got a bit of money, isn't it great that borrowing is so cheap? The problem is that we do actually need a strong savings sector to grow the economy. We all want the economy to grow. The economy does not grow by trying to get people into the high street and spending money, especially more money than they've got. We're already the most indebted of the Western industrial nations. But in order to actually get the economy to grow, you've got to get investment. Where does the investment come from? It comes from savings. And we need the government to actually look forward a longer time in future and realise that we need a strong savings sector. The other reason we need a strong savings sector, of course, is that in times when the economy is a little better and when interest rates are higher, savers actually spend a great deal of money because they have an income. You take the income away and you take away that spending. And that is what's happened here and in the States. But it's something that the government, and particularly the Bank of England, just don't seem to ever think about.
Oh, well, OK. Thank you so very much, Simon Rose. If you are a saver... I'm going to keep Simon on the line, I think, because I want to carry on talking to him about this. We've only just touched the tip of the iceberg, but it will start melting, and we'll find out how you do actually save after some travel with James Worley. Jenny Barney, if you've just joined me, it's just gone 10:15. I am, as we speak, talking to Simon Rose from the campaign group SaveOurSavers. We're talking about what savers can do. You know, Simon, thank you for holding on. I've got all sorts of figures in front of me. You know, the bank, to deliver its half-yearly results, the Royal Bank of Scotland, it made a profit of £1.4 billion in the first 6 months of the year. That's compared with losses of £1.7 billion last year. And it's good news for the taxpayer. Is it good news for savers?
Well, it's always better if the banks are actually making some money rather than losing it hand over fist. The problem with all of our banks is they're still incredibly fragile, even 5 years after the crisis. They don't really admit to the bad loans that they've got on their books. I mean, bank figures are very hard to interpret anyway, but because of low interest rates, a lot of companies that might perhaps otherwise be in trouble are sort of being supported by the banks. The banks don't want to admit that they've got all these bad loans, and as a result, we have what they call zombie companies, which are sucking, investment money away from the new businesses that might actually be producing growth. So, yeah, it's better that the banks are actually showing that they're making some money. But, of course, that just means that the government's going to then try and sell off RBS and ask the taxpayer, presumably, to buy shares in it. So
let me ask you, Simon, if our interest rates were to go up, that would mean that savers would be making a few pennies. But that would then mean that mortgage owners and people who are having to survive that way, they would be worse off. How do you... I mean, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, are we?
Well, it's true. The problem is that low interest rates have not actually produced growth. I mean, the Bank of England does believe that is the case, but it's certainly not happened. Yes, some mortgage owners have benefited from having lower rates, but if you've got an overdraft, if you've got a credit card bill, that rate is still almost exactly what it was when the crisis began. So the borrowers are by and large not particularly better off at all. It's just the savers who have lost their money. Now, we have a very odd attitude towards interest rates here, and indeed in many countries where we have central banks, in that we have these 9 theoretical economists who don't really understand people, but they do understand theoretical economics, who decide the price of money. Well, this is a very odd thing. We don't have some central committee deciding the price of shoes or the price of our food. Somehow they seem to think they can decide what price money should be. Now, when you cut the price of something, you'll normally also cut the supply. If you said to Apple, for instance, you know what, your stuff's too expensive, you can't sell an iPad in future for more than £50 in the UK, well, we wouldn't see many iPads being sold. And the problem is we now have a shortage of money in the economy because the price of it has been cut. It's very odd, this sort of central planning, almost Stalinist idea that they can decide the price of money. Money would be freed up if it was allowed to find its natural level.
How does that happen, though? How does money find its natural level?
Well, interestingly, we do have a newish sector in the economy called peer-to-peer or social lending. You may have seen these companies like RateSetter or Zopa or Funding Circle. These are companies that bring together buyers and sellers. You have some money you want to lend out to businesses or to individuals, you go to one of these people. You have money you want to borrow, you go to them as well. Now, the rates there are considerably higher than they are elsewhere. Zopa, for instance, if you want to put your money with them for 5 years, is 4.5%. Hardly absolutely fantastic, but compared to what you get elsewhere, it certainly is. RateSetter are offering, for instance, for 1 year, 2.8%. Now, one problem with these is you're taking on extra risk. If you're putting your savings into a bank or building society, you are protected by the government up to $85,000. With these peer-to-peer lenders, you are taking more risk on, so you've got to judge whether that is worthwhile or not. But that is an area where we are seeing more of a free market interest rate. And the extraordinary thing is that after the last few years, those peer-to-peer groups are seeing a phenomenal increase in business Simply because they're not setting the price of money themselves. They're letting people do it.
But we are talking about sums of money that most of us can't afford. Most of us, after we've been given either our pensions or our paychecks, don't have enough money set aside that we can save with.
If you can afford to borrow, you can afford to save. It's simply a question of whether you are taking the money now or whether, as many savers do, you're deciding to put money aside in order to have something. And it's certainly, even at these rates, much more beneficial to save for something and have the money rather than borrow it and have to pay the interest.
OK, so here's my final question. Is this a cross-party policy that you're looking for? Are the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats, are they all doing the wrong thing, saying the same thing? What would you want to hear our politicians do and say?
You're right. All the parties have a blindness towards this. They all espouse the cause of savings, but none of them want to do anything about it. It's quite interesting that before they came into power, both Mr Cameron and Mr Osborne said that incentivising debt and penalising savings is economically illiterate and morally reprehensible. Well, we don't think they're wrong, but somehow now they're in power, they've changed their mind. And we will not see growth in this economy at all. We will be doomed to a stagnant decade or more, as has happened in Japan, if we don't actually boost savings and if we rely entirely upon debt, because eventually the debt has to be repaid. And what is happening is that we are penalising the next generation and the generation after that. We are saddling them with the bill for the politicians' ineptitude.
Simon, if people want to join your campaign, what do they do?
Simply, it's free. You just come to SaveOurSavers.co.uk. The more savers who join us, the louder the voice with which we can speak. We know that savers are incredibly angry, but in fact it's good for the country, not just savers, if we're a stronger group. We want as many people as possible to come and join us.
Thank you so much, Simon Rose.